Ms. President, we will call to order the November 26, 2024 meeting of the Zionsville Redevelopment Commission. We'll start first with consent agenda items. They have been distributed. Are there any questions or comments? Any objection to accepting the consent items? Seeing none, the items are approved. We'll move next to the director's report. Corey?
Good morning, Commissioners. Corey Sharp, Director of the RDC. I have a couple updates for you. The first one is in regards to the Ready Grant. The town has been awarded an additional $4 million from IEDC and through the CERTA organization to work on the construction of the projects that we currently are working on designing. So that would be the road realignment and projects within the South Village. The last month, we had issued an RFP for designers to design the plaza that is proposed to be located north of Sycamore Street. We had 3 submissions that were considered in detail, and framework was selected, which is a local landscape architecture firm. They will start work probably in the new year after we work through contract negotiations with them and get them rolling in the new year.
That's on design?
And that is part of the Ready 1.0 grant. So then Creekside, we will have 2 projects closed next month. We will have lots 4 and 5 closed, the Fru's Eye Care. They are currently at Plan Commission seeking their development approval and their plat. In that plat approval, they are squaring up lot 3. And that will be a part of our closing documents. And then also Kreider and Kreider on lot 2 will also close. Kreider and Kreider will be here in December to show us a site plan and some of their closing package documents like Fru's showed us last month. Lots 7 and 8, they are finalizing their due diligence and will close right in the beginning of the new year. So those are my updates for the director's report.
Just for clarity, and for the record, so the closing of those 2 projects will allow us to bring current our agreement with the school.
Yes, we have even asked Katie to have the school send us an invoice so that we can have that invoice included in our closing documentation. And that will be just part of the closing obligations, is to have a check written to the school for former Creekside payment obligations.
Good. All right. Thank you. Any questions for Corey? All right. Thank you. We'll move next to old business. There's nothing listed. So we'll move to item 5, new business, and we'll start with the farm phase 2. We have 2 items related to that development. We'll start with the TIF pledge resolution. Corey, do we have Heather or someone from ICE who helped draft this on?
I had told Heather that I would cover us this morning, and Jeremy Ullum is here, counsel for the developers. Joe, would you mind turning on the Elmo for me? I do have a summary.
Okay.
Yes.
We don't have our screens up yet. There we go.
You have a copy of it in front of you?
Yes.
Farm is a project that came through several years ago, 2 years ago, 2022. And it was a mixed-use development. They sought a PUD, planned unit development, to do this mixed-use development. And that was approved as a whole. When they came through to do their TIF request for infrastructure improvements, they broke it down into two phases. The first phase, which was approved back in May of 2022, was infrastructure that was needed to kind of create the baseline for development. And on the screen, I have shown where the project is at. It's at the southwest corner of 116th and Michigan Road. And the project that you see up on the screen is from phase one. It is the apartment project that we all have been watching go up, along with a 400, the apartment project has 400 multifamily units in it and about a 400 car garage in it. Their project included building out all of the base development infrastructure, including sanitary sewer, storm water management, and the inner road connections that connect to 116th and Michigan Road. In the effort of them seeking a TIF, we created a project agreement. And in that project agreement, we outlined kind of the baseline of the deal for both phases. And in that project agreement, we showed two exhibits. These are the two exhibits. This side is phase one, and then this side is phase two, showing where the TIF funds could be spent. So let me scroll out just a little bit here and walk through the differences of what we had requested, what was approved in the past, and then what is being asked of us today. So as I mentioned, the project agreements was to construct this multifamily development on the west side of the parcel. On the east side of the parcel is the retail component of the development where you saw the yellow. And that is what we are considering today, is the revenue, the tax revenue that is a part of phase two for the commercial spaces. The TIF pledge in phase one was 95%. And in the project agreement, the developers agreed to a 50-50 split for phase two. So the resolution that you have today is the consideration for a 50-50 split. Crow did our financial projections on both sides, phase one and phase two. The project fund for phase one was $12.2 million. And the project fund for phase two is just under $1 million. The differences between these two bond amounts is obviously the magnitude of the assessed value that's coming in. And Tim and Becca with Crow are here if we have any questions about that. Their annual revenue, the tax revenue that is coming in, since we have closed on the first project, we know that 95% of the tax revenue can go towards the repayment of their debt in phase one, which is just under $9,900,000. And then the 50% annual revenue projection is $51,000 approximately. So the timelines that we are being requested is the maximum 25 years. The first phase will expire in 2047, and this phase will expire in 2050. In the project agreement, we had written how the TIF funds could be used. And as I mentioned, for the first phase, it was parking garage, sanitary sewer, interior road infrastructure. The second phase, we had agreed that we would allow them to use TIF for additional infrastructure improvements, including ancillary and beautification infrastructure improvements. From a bond type standpoint, we have always talked about the the developers buying the bond, if it's not a city purchase bond. There's now a new methodology for the sale of bonds, which is a third-party purchaser. And that is how they will be selling their bonds. They won't be buying the bonds and putting them out on the market. They're putting them out with a third party. So from the town standpoint, because we have essentially a 75-25 split on the whole project, we will receive about $100,000 annually in TIF revenue for phase 1 and phase 2. As I mentioned, Pittman and his team are here in the audience today if we have specific questions. From a timeline standpoint, we are in the process of, the developers in the process of getting other approvals. They have gone before the Economic Development Commission. They've had their first reading at the town council. Plan Commission, Zach, when is that?
So we don't have to do anything for Plan
Oh,
Commission.
great.
And they have had their second reading for Town Council as well, and that's been approved.
Okay, so today we're considering the TIF pledge resolution and the taxpayer agreement. And then December, we will make our final approvals, which is when we will have the public hearing as well. Did I miss anything, Jeremy? Oh.
We don't need to have a public hearing on this today at this meeting.
If the EDA, you're correct, Jeremy, the economic development area is set up. And so, and that is the public hearing component of it. And the EDA covers this entire parcel.
But it's the Michigan Road EDA, which extends further north. It gathers all the commercial properties along Michigan Road up to what, 126th Street?
That's correct.
Yeah, I wish I had a map of that right now.
I've got it in the, if you open up the TIF memorandum in your
Oh, thank you.
packet, it has a map of the EDAs. We don't have anything bonded north of, this is the only obligation. So the 75% governs the entire, both phases of the agreement. So annually, are we making adjustments to ensure that we're making sure that, because the resolution sets it at 50-50. Yeah, Jeremy, please.
I'm Jeremy. I'll represent Pittman Development, Pittman Partners in this development. Yeah, this is part of the larger EDA, right? And we have two allocation areas here. One for phase 1, 95% pledge. That transaction's over, right? Those bonds have been issued. That project's nearing completion. There's a second allocation area that was originally established and is established for phase 2. This is the first component of phase 2. So we're really back today in line with the original project agreement, in line with everything that was originally proposed. You're pledging 50% of the TIF revenue in that phase 2 allocation area to this initial series of bonds. There will be multiple series of bonds in phase 2. Phase 2 has multiple phases, however, I don't know what the proper term is, but so we'll be back for pledge resolutions as those come online. We don't want to issue those prematurely. But the first phase of phase 2 is represented here in this amount. So I think the bottom line is that all of this was established a few years ago, but for the pledge, which is what we're here seeking today. And really not much of anything has changed in the project. It's, I think, proceeding at pace, and this is where we expect it to be.
As phases roll on, as part of this, the commercial outlots, and you come back for pledge resolutions, will the percentages adjust as you go to secure financing so that we hit that set, so that we maintain the 75%?
It'll be 50% of phase 2. And then I think the 75-25 is kind of a rough projection of the totality. So you're at 95.5 on phase 1, and that's already set. we'll be seeking 50% pledges of each component of phase two as we go.
So how do we govern the 25, 75?
I don't think
I
that's
don't
a
think you
real
do.
thing.
Yeah, I don't think you
I think
do. I
that
think
was
that's an
a-
estimate. Yeah,
That was an informal,
agreed.
overall, this is how it's likely to shake out if we give 95 here, 50 here, but the only pledges are 95 in phase one and 50 in phase
Correct.
two, which should end up at about 75, 25. So I think it's more guidance than.
Okay.
Correct.
And I guess the only other question, so we established the allocation area for phase two when we did the whole project. Is that when the base date was set for the AV?
That is when the base date was set for the AV, and then your 25-year clock starts upon the issuance of this first series of bonds, because that doesn't start till you actually issue an obligation payable out of that phase two allocation area.
Okay, so that would have been in 2022 was the base date.
Yeah, I'll
for phase. for
confirm
both
that with
phases.
Becca. Yeah, Becca's shaking her head, yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah. I think Jeremy, you answered it. Just, there's multiple phases in phase two.
Correct, yeah.
So the 225, it's not being suggested that 225,000 square feet of commercial will produce 100,000 annually in TIF, right? I mean, that's, so how many square feet of commercial in phase one of phase two?
42,000.
We're thinking that's only going to yield about $2, $2.25 a square foot in taxes.
Heard of it. That sounds like numbers, Darren.
Yeah, sounds awfully
Numbers
low.
for-
I mean,
yeah.
I guess it really doesn't matter. More, maybe the question is if the taxes come in higher than the projection, is it still split 50-50?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yes, it's split 50-50. I do think because of the nature of phase two, so we're calling this phase 2A. It's the farm 2A LLC. So 2A, 2B, 2C. I don't know, there's 3 or 4 phases. Because of the nature, if taxes come in higher, we've tried to be conservative. I know Sam and Crow have tried to be conservative here with phase 2A. We might pick those up in phase 2B, right? To stay at 50-50 because you're pledging 50% of the TIF from from the phase 2 allocation area. So when we come back for phase 2B, we'll have better line of sight probably on phase 2A assessment and be able to kind of proceed accordingly.
Any questions for Becca with Crow?
Wanted to clarify the $50,000, that's just for 2A, so not the complete total like aggregate of phase 2.
No, I understand. It just
Okay.
seems like for 42,000 square feet, it would kick out more than 100,000 a year in taxes. Or I wish my projects did, had that similar, ratio. So.
Any further questions?
I'm curious about the financing and the third party purchaser. Has that person or that purchaser been identified?
Yeah, that's Hageman. Hageman Capital will be purchasing the bonds.
Okay, and then the issuance costs are much more than phase one. Is there something significant going on there?
Haven't looked at that. I'm not familiar.
Do you know, Becca?
You know, Becca?
So
Phase 1 was purchased by the developer, Scannell, in that
have you
phase.
negotiated a rate?
No.
But this has to assume some sort of
Yes.
interest rate.
Max rate's 8%. That's approved by the council. And I think we'll be there.
Are you safe with that?
Huh?
Are you
It's
safe at
taxable.
the 8?
It's taxable. Are we what?
Are you safe with the 8% max?
Yeah,
I
we're
guess
sizing
they
it. I mean, we're
structure
sizing it
anyway,
accordingly,
yeah.
yeah. So we're backing into the sizing, yeah.
Feels high to me, honestly. I mean, if the backup is a tax revenue,
There is no backup. It's payable solely from the TIF and then from taxpayer payments to the developer. So if the TIF is
what's
short,
the developer? Okay,
you rely on the taxpayer payments and it's taxable.
okay.
I think I've seen it above 8 recently.
I have as well.
But I guess you can play with the discount.
We have a little bit of a
premium.
discount available, up to 3%.
While we have you up here, is there any objection to handling the taxpayer agreement discussion now as well? We can handle them separately, but if we can handle the discussion now. I don't see any objections, so we, Jeremy, while we've got you up here, is there any context or comments that you want to offer on the taxpayer agreement?
Very similar to what you've probably seen before. I mean, the bottom line with the taxpayer agreement is if the TIF is short, and this is one of the reasons I think we've been a little conservative in the projections in 2A, because we don't want to be in a position where we're having shortfalls or making taxpayer agreements, right out of the gate by any stretch. So, yeah, the developer is obligated to make taxpayer payments to the extent the pledge TIF, that 50% is not sufficient. That'll be recorded on the property that's part of 2A, and it'll run with that property moving forward.
Like something in here about appeals.
I think we can appeal to the extent it would reduce it below 1-to-1 coverage on the bonds. I think. Don't hold me to that.
Any questions on the taxpayer agreement? Okay, thank you so much. Is there anyone else here on behalf of the farm that would like to submit comments? I don't see any. We have the TIF pledge resolution in front of us. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Next, we'll move to the taxpayer agreement. Is there a motion?
I'll move that we approve the taxpayer agreement.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We'll move next to the parking study, and we have an update and a presentation.
Earlier this year, we hired Hitchcock Design and WGI as a team to complete a parking study. Zach and I have been working with them over the last couple months to finesse and just make sure that we're getting all of the data that we need. And so I'm going to let Zach introduce the team and then tee up their presentation. We've got a couple folks here from them.
We have two different people for the team. We have individuals from WGI, and then we also have individuals from Hitchcock Design. I believe we have, where'd they go? Randy Royer, Raymond and Benjamin here to speak on the matter. You guys want to come up? Should have someone on Zoom. I don't know if they're online or not. Okay.
I think they're waiting to be let in the meeting. Ben was waiting to be let in the meeting. Okay, me.
Is there any objection to moving on to the next item while we? No objections. Okay, we'll move. Do you want to do the annual spending plan? Yeah. Okay. So I believe this is a new requirement under state law that as of just the end of this year, we have to submit a spending plan for the RDC to the Department of Local Government Finance. I don't know if we have a resolution or if it's just. Why don't you go ahead, Corey?
It's not a resolution, but it is a a form that we need to submit to DLGF. And so Barnes and Thornburg put together a great template for all RDCs to use across the state. And we reviewed the template with the Finance Committee at the last meeting. And basically, because we had already approved our budget, we took our budget line items and put them in the template that was put together by Barnes and Thornburg. That is due to the state by December 1st. So we just wanted to bring that to your attention that we will be submitting that. And I believe that is in your packet for you to have a review of it.
We did go over that in the finance committee meeting, and it was relatively straightforward. There were a couple of items that were discussed in the about how they apply, but I think in general, it was pretty straightforward.
Already approved the budget for 2025. So these are just data points from the document that we've already approved.
Yes, sir.
A formal approval to submit it.
I would recommend taking a vote on it and approving it.
Is there a motion to approve the annual spending plan?
I'll move that we approve the annual spending plan.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further conversation? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Are we ready? We can move.
Joe, do we have him on yet?
Okay, we'll do it through Teams.
We'll move back to the parking study update.
I'm Raymond Smith with WGI, and that's Ben Sands with WGI. Ben, you want to see if we can hear you okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Why don't you go ahead and drive the screen?
Okay, we see on the screen?
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Ben Sands. I'm the manager of parking planning and operations for WGI, and we're here to just do a quick summary of our downtown parking study. We'll quickly go through our occupancy observations and then look at or consider future development in the downtown area and what that'll do to parking demand, and consider adequacy. And then maybe at the end, talk about some structured parking concepts that we've worked up for you. So let's just jump right in, and feel free to stop me if anybody has any questions. So we came down for two measurements, one a typical weekday where we measured occupancies pre-lunch period, during the AM period, and an after lunch period, and an early evening period about 4 p.m. We also came back on a Saturday and measured occupancies during the farmers market, and kind of during the farmers market, right after the farmers market, and in the evening period. You guys have a current inventory of 365 on-street spaces and 116 off-street spaces, and made up of 2 off-street parking locations within the central downtown area, for a total of 481 spaces. During the farmers market event, you actually shut down one of the off-street locations to facilitate the farmers market, and you close just under 30 spaces of on-street parking during that same period to facilitate the farmer's market. So there is some diminishment of your inventory during the farmer's market event that occurs each Saturday. Which consequently was the period by which we saw that your parking actually achieved a full status, or essentially full. It was 99% occupied. We saw 4 vacant on-street spaces, but there were well more than 4 milling vehicles on the streets looking for spaces during that same period. So effectively your parking was full. We also noticed that the Lions Club Park was full at the same period, and that there were cars parking on some vacant parcels south of Sycamore, kind of creating their own spaces, some grass parking even, we noted. But even on a typical day, Wednesday, August 7th, we noted that your parking was, on-street parking was effectively full at 86% full at 11 a.m. pre-lunch period. And that condition seemed to continue forward through the afternoon, started to abate a little bit by 4 p.m. into the evening, but showing just really strong parking occupancies for the on-street environment. Off-streets considerably less occupied during the typical weekday, but all those parkers found the off-street locations during the farmers market. We can tell you that because every single one of the off-street spaces was full. So just moving on. As we consider what does that mean for adequacy and future planning for downtown Zionsville, your parking is already effectively full. That condition, based on our coordination with the town staff, that farmers market condition occurs every Saturday, and that puts you guys at a constricted place of parking where your parking is already effectively full. Based on our observations out at the site, we assumed that even if those supplemental 60 spaces were released that were closed for the farmers market, those spaces would have also been full had they been available. So we just made the assumption that all your spaces are at capacity, and in effect you need more capacity during the farmers market. So we applied a 15% excess current or projected excess demand, basically to incorporate the intended optimal vacancy percentage that you would want to have during that period. And this generated a total demand of 553 spaces for the current downtown. And we take that into the context as we look forward towards future development. So we had a single development for the Brick Street Inn that would incorporate use of the existing off-street parking location, and generate 75 hotel rooms, some small retail space and restaurant space, as well as a large hotel event space. We took that and modeled out a shared parking demand summary that generated a total peak demand of 221 new parking spaces of demand that this development would generate on a weekend and a weekend afternoon, evening. So taking this new demand of 221 spaces, this is how that demand would lay out on an hourly basis in terms of when those peaks would occur. It's important to note that the predominant source of the demand is the event space, the hotel event space. And so this is assuming that there is an event occurring during these periods, that it's modeling peak parking demand. So we take that and combine it with our understanding of future parking adequacy. So based on our conversations with the town staff, we understand that the lot at Main and Pine is planned for the development for the Brick Street Inn expansion. And we understand that the surface lot at the corner of Main and Hawthorne is planned for development of space to facilitate the farmers market as you remove the other current location of the farmers market. So in effect, that equates to the removal of all off-street parking provided by the town currently, which gives you negative 116 spaces. So we took the current demand plus the excess that we had modeled before, so 553 spaces of current demand plus the 221 new spaces of demand to equal a total future parking demand of 774 spaces when compared to your 365 off-street spaces, has created a shortage of 328. That something's wrong with my math there. But we are well over 300 spaces short there. So how do we manage parking demand? One of the key ways of managing parking demand is to apply regulation. And that initially could mean things like time limits, but could also expand to things like fees if such a thing would be supported by downtown businesses and users. But our basic steps in the initial phase of managing parking demand are to convene a parking task force to gather together stakeholders of the downtown area, along with town staff, to generate a vision for what's the best use of parking and the best way to manage parking, and also to create some consensus amongst the community to support the vision for management and regulation of parking. Create and support a parking organizational structure within the town's infrastructure, and define which department is managing parking and assign a specific individual to have a responsibility for parking. Create a communications plan for communicating with the general public, and then just expanding parking management based on what the consensus decision was from the parking task force on the best vision for parking management in the town. Improving parking operations means hiring or assigning parking specific staff. That may mean allocating some portion of an existing police staff's rounds to perpetuating enforcement activities, but or it may mean hiring supplemental staff if such a thing were supported by the vision of management for the downtown. Evaluate and procure parking enforcement technologies, which means software that can issue parking tickets and track the parking tickets and put them out for collections if they're unpaid, but also define repeat violators so that escalated enforcement measures can be taken when necessary. And that might mean things like towing and or booting if such a thing were acceptable to the town's vision for parking management. Adapting parking policies is a key strategy for managing parking demand. Implementing or adjusting time limits. If your parking demand is still high and you have time limits in place that are being actively and aggressively enforced, then obviously modulating those time limits to a shorter term is one of the first steps that would be a good practice. But sometimes parking demand has already evolved to such a state where you might want to consider introducing parking fees and skipping over the time limits. But nonetheless, communicating the process, committing to parking enforcement in the downtown to show accountabilities for the rules that are being implemented. And during your implementation period, consider issuing warning tickets for the first 30 days so that you take a softer approach with locals to communicate kind of the new regulations that are being implemented.
Mr. Sands,
Yes.
for the sake of time, can I ask if we could skip forward to the site options? And then I'd also ask if you would speak a little more directly into your mic so that we can hear you better.
Absolutely. Can you hear me better now?
A little better.
Okay.
I wonder if, yeah, can we turn the audio up?
Yep, I'm doing so.
Okay. We just need to have you speak very clearly and directly into your microphone so we can pick up what you're saying.
Absolutely. Okay. So moving on to the site options. So here we have the two site options that we coordinated with the town staff. Garage site option 1, which is at the corner of Elm and Pine, and the second one, which is at the current location of the city's off-street parking location at the corner of Main and Hawthorne. We're using our parking structure cost outlook to inform our cost estimations for the structured parking concepts at these two sites. So this is site 1's concept, which generates 251 spaces by providing 2 levels of subterranean parking or below grade parking and 3 levels of supported parking. This does push all the way to the extent of the current vertical construction limit within the downtown. But we wanted to generate as many spaces as we possibly could with this footprint the city provided, which is at the corner of Pine and Elm Street. This is just the other sections of the garage. This garage, 6 total levels, 3 supported levels, 2 below grade, and our initial construction estimate is 9.3 million for this structure. We do have it further detailed by level on a following slide. For site 2, at the corner of Main and Hawthorne, we generated a solely subterranean concept with the expectation that the city intended to use some portion of the site to facilitate a farmer's market. So we did leave a plaza area available at the corner of Main and Hawthorne that could be used as such, and strictly modeled subterranean parking. So we have 2 levels of subterranean and a small portion of at grade parking for this concept. This one generates only 152 spaces at 7.1 million as a construction cost estimate. So just looking at current parking inventory and then the elimination of the 2 surface lots leaves you with a remaining parking inventory of 365 spaces. Current parking demand is now at 553 spaces, and we're adding 221 spaces of new parking demands to the total. So looking at the parking adequacy chart, this is just, we modeled if one of the garages were introduced and or if 2 of the garages were introduced separately or together, and then if there was no garage. With no garage, your adequacy stays at 409 spaces, a shortfall 409 spaces. Future parking demand for, if you incorporate site 1's concept, you'll be 158 spaces short. If you just incorporated site 2, you'd be 257 spaces short. Incorporating both sites puts at us approximately 6 spaces short on our model of future parking demand and adequacy. This is how those cost estimates break out by level. We did this with the intent that you might wish to remove some portions or levels of the garage based on the extent to which they were designed. But in combination, this is just a summary of the cost estimates for both garage options. And that brings us to the conclusion of the presentation.
In your, when you did your inventory, does the off-street parking include any private parking within the village? It does not. So when you've done other studies in other communities, I'm aware of at least one study where you worked through a process of managing parking with private owners. Can you kind of talk through that, and what do you contemplate any synergies there?
There are some small private parking assets within the downtown area, but there were not any large provisions of vacant space provided by private parking there. What we noticed as we did look at the parking occupancies in the private locations that we could see, and those occupancies trailed directly with the occupancies of the downtown. So there did not appear to be any opportunities for shared use parking, which is, I believe, what you're referring to in terms of opportunities to use private parking assets when they're not in use to supplement the demand for parking in the downtown. There are some small opportunities there with some of the small surface lots provided throughout the downtown, but there was not any significant opportunity there that fell within that Sycamore main corridor.
My last question. So I'm looking at the concept for site 1 at Pine and Elm. I'm just trying to make sure that what I'm seeing is correct. This does include the My Sugar Pie site. Is that the
That is
building
correct.
included? That's correct. Okay.
That is correct. That's that panhandle, if you will, to the left of the design concept.
Okay. Any other questions?
A couple. Did you guys look at the efficiency of on-street parking? We don't have striped streets, so the inefficiencies of people's parking habits, how many spaces are we losing on average or typically?
We didn't find significant inefficiencies within your downtown on-street parking due to the absence of lines between the spaces or demarking the spaces. If anything, we often find that greater efficiencies occurred by the removal of the lines as people naturally start to stack in a little bit closer. There are some obvious exceptions sometimes as people specifically apply strategies of spacing their vehicles to not allow for vehicles to park in between them. But we did not notice any specific inefficiencies with the on-street environment.
And then what was the study area? What were the project boundaries for this, the study?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, we went from, I believe it was Cedar to the north. Yeah, it was Cedar Street to the north, Elm Street to the east, Sycamore Street to the south, and the Second Street, but then Second Street only went to Oak, and then it cut over to First.
That's something we can get in an illustration at some
Yes,
point.
absolutely. I had it
Okay.
in the slideshow, and I'll have to find it and send it to you certainly.
So if you stopped at Sycamore, the lot that's informally used on the southwest corner of Sycamore and
Yes, this one
Main,
here.
was that in your study area?
Was not within the study area, but we observed that during the farmer's market, that location was used or people had basically just started to squat park there where they just started to make their own spaces.
Okay.
But so it didn't pick up anybody who might be going into the neighborhoods.
Correct.
to the north of that and walking.
Right.
So
I mean, the habit of folks that I know, they oftentimes park outside of that boundary to frequent businesses in the village. Being a village resident, I mean, I see people walking 5-6 blocks is a very common thing.
Yeah, and you're referring to this neighborhood kind of to the west of downtown in terms of the pavilion.
Yes.
And during farmers market, we certainly noted that, you know, all the on-street spaces were full and that the parking demand started to push into these neighborhoods. However, that was not part of our scope, was to measure the occupancies in the adjacent neighborhood.
Was there a calculation of the quantity of private lots, private parking in the study area? Do we have a rough estimate of what that quantity actually is?
I'd have to look back at our notes to see if we did actually quantify it. I believe we did, but I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
To that point, also, I noticed that the Lions Park, that parking area is outside of the study area as well.
That is, we did specifically note on the farmer's market that location was completely full. But there was also some events occurring at the park during that same period.
There are 2 lots at the Lions Park, one by the tennis court, kind of down the hill off of Elm Street. Was that one also that you looked at when you were looking at it or on those farmers market days?
Yeah, the Elm Street, we did observe occupancies on Elm Street and incorporate those spaces into the inventory that we reviewed. So if you were referring to the kind of the angled spaces up here towards the end of Elm Street, then those spaces were part of our observation.
Yeah,
Brad.
it's actually on the Lions Park property down the hill towards the tennis courts, which would be on there's a separate parking lot down there as well.
I'll have to look back at our notes from our observations and just, I'll get back to you on that one as well.
This image that you have pulled up on the presentation, it is directly northeast and it's kind of just east of the Lions Club building.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't believe that was specifically quantified as into our inventory and occupancy review, but I know that our observer went through those areas, so I'll just have to look back at his notes.
Yes, my last question is, did you observe driveways and or on-street parking opportunities that could be gained with some reconfiguration of curbing or access in the village?
There were not any specific areas that we observed where we perceived that there were significant opportunities for gained efficiency. But we would be happy to look at some areas if there was an area that you had specifically in mind.
Advocating that those Lions Park lots should have been in the project scope. I mean, those are not public. I mean, those are really not town owned.
They're not, but they are public available. I mean, they're not enforcing it as private parking.
Yeah.
So, and there's not a lot down the hill, but there's some that I used to work just on the upside of that hill, and my window overlooked that. I mean, people would always be parking down there and flowing into the village for lunch hours. May not even be that many. Yeah, that's probably about right. Yeah.
I have a question. If by chance the town builds both parking structures that you're proposing, what kind of projection of usage do you foresee, and how long would those structures, I'm not sure how to ask this. I mean, how long in the future will it solve the problem, I guess is what I'm asking.
What's the life expectancy of those structures? Ray, can you speak to that?
Well,
Are you asking how long before then you need even more parking? to be able to-
Yes. Yes, yeah.
How
Well,
far
let
in
me-
the future did you project demand? I think
Yes.
that's probably the
Yeah,
right question.
right. I didn't ask it very well.
Yeah, we only projected demand through the expansion of the Brick Street Inn.
Any future development would have to provide its own.
I'm sorry.
Yep. Go ahead. The second parking structure option, the Main and Hawthorne. The first option was it all being below grade, correct? Alternate site 2.
Yes, that is all below grade.
So there would be surface parking and then 2 levels below grade, correct?
That's right.
Okay. How many parking spaces do we lose for the ingress and egress of that? Is that kind of factored into your total of 152? With that new reconfiguration of streets, do we lose parking on street with that garage?
So we're using the existing curb cut, I believe, for the surface lot that lives there. So I don't think that there's necessarily any reconfiguration of the on-street spaces specific to where the curb cut is placed for the proposed parking structure. However, the street modulations would generate some changes to on-street parking, I would assume.
Yeah, I think his question was, what's the net gain? Because there is parking in that location right now, but the garage itself generates 152.
Oh,
We'd have to
yeah,
s-
I'm sorry. So it's a 71 space gain. It's a current 81 space surface lot. And 152 spaces gives you 71 additional spaces.
Um, for the engineers in the room, I don't know this answer, but is there any consideration for extending the lower levels of that parking garage below streets, meaning that it expands underneath First Street, Hawthorne, Main Street? Do we have the ability to do that, or is there too much infrastructure in the way to be able to make that garage much bigger subterranean?
I can actually answer that. When we started investigating this area, we did a utility study. And First Street is the utility corridor because we were evaluating being able to bury additional utility lines in the First Street corridor. We also looked at Main Street and Sycamore. Sycamore, there might be some opportunities to expand it to the south. But Main Street, we have really been very sensitive about don't touching the bricks. So not trying to stay away from those areas.
Further questions? Do you have a report that will be submitted, and what kind of time frame?
I think we're looking to generate the report here in the next month.
Yeah, we had asked for them to make this draft presentation of the report, understand if there's any gaps or other things that we were looking at. I think we have a couple things that we want to take away from it. We will then publish the report on the website.
Thank you. Good. Let's move next to our last item of new business. We have a request for a bond disbursement for Holiday Farm Senior Living, which I believe is the Century Project. It's in the packet. Are there any questions? Has this been reviewed by council to ensure that everything is?
Yeah, Heather James reviewed it and gave it the okay.
Questions, comments?
Move to approve.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. Any conversation on the motion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion's approved unanimously. We'll move next to other business. Is there a report of the finance subcommittee?
Yeah, basically, we kind of went over it already in most of the meeting was for the DGL or DLG. If I got that wrong, I apologize. That was the majority of what we discussed. We did discuss some of the payments for this month also, but for general, that's what we discussed.
Questions? Seeing none. We have no governance subcommittee report this month. Is there a CDC update, Commissioner Pierce?
Primarily.
Mic is not coming on.
It's not on at all.
I thought I turned all of them on. That one may have had an error.
I can speak up. I'm usually pretty good at that. But primarily we focused on the Creekside HOA budget for 2025, as well as fine tuning again and discussing the strategy on granting for economic development.
Any questions? All right. Our next meeting is Tuesday, December 17th at 9 a.m. Is there a
We have
motion?
one other item before you close. We had Cindy was gonna offer a quick update on the bank account transfer.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Good morning, Cindy Poor, RDC Treasurer. About a year ago, the decision was made to open an account, a bank account for the RDC funds, which that was completed. About early third quarter, the town decided to do an banking RFP, and We included the RDC account within that RFP. The decision was made to go with BMO, and we are actually, RDC funds are actually completely transferred over to the new account at BMO. It's an interest-bearing account. Right now, it's earning 2.84, but rates just went down. So I've already been in contact with our representative, and we'll keep an eye on these things to see if there's a better product that the money needs to be in. But right now, that's where it's at. And the current balance for BMO or for the account is just under 3.8 million, which may seem a little low, but it's close to year end and you get your disbursements twice a year. So you'll be getting more funds at the December settlement from the tax. So, okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. The time is 10:02. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We are adjourned.
Fast.